Hi, I'm Claire, a librarian with Acton Memorial Library, and in this video I'm going to share with you the 7th part of the book The Children of Odin, a book of Norse mythology by Pedrick Cullum. If you missed any of the previous 6 parts, they're available on Acton Memorial Library's YouTube channel. And thank you for joining me for part 7. Part 7 is called How Frey Won Gerda, the Giant Maiden, and How He Lost His Magic Sword. Frey, the chief of the Vanir, longed to have sight of his sister who had been from Asgard for so long. You must know that this happened during the time when Freya was wandering through the world seeking her husband, the lost Odur. Now there was in Asgard a place from which one could overlook the world and have a glimpse of all who wandered there. That place was Aloud-Acton, Odin's lofty watchtower. I just want to pause to mention I'm not confident of that pronunciation, but it looks like Aloud-Acton. High up into the blue of the air that tower went. Frey came to it, and he knew that Odin All-Father was not upon Aloud-Acton. Only the 2 wolves, Gerda and Frey, that crouched beside Odin's seat at the banquet were there, and they stood in the way of Frey's entrance to the tower. But Frey spoke to Gerda and Frey in the language of the gods, and Odin's wolves had to let him pass. But as he went up the steps within the tower, Frey, chief of the Vanir, knew that he was doing a fateful thing. For none of the high gods, not even Thor, the defender of Asgard, nor Baldur, the best beloved of the gods, had ever climbed to the top of that tower and seated themselves upon the All-Father's seat. But if I could see my sister once, I should be contented, said Frey to himself, and no harm can come to me if I look out on the world. He came to the top of Aloud-Acton. He seated himself on Odin's lofty seat. He looked out on the world. He saw Midgard, the world of men, with its houses and towns, its farms and people. Beyond Midgard he saw Jotunheim, the realm of the giants, terrible with its dark mountains and its masses of snow and ice. He saw Freya as she went upon her wanderings, and he marked that her face was turned towards Asgard, and that her steps were leading towards the city of the gods. I have contented myself by looking from Aloud-Acton, Frey said to himself, and no harm has come to me. But even as he spoke, his gaze was drawn to a dwelling that stood in the middle of the ice and snow of Jotunheim. Long he gazed upon that dwelling without knowing why he looked that way. And then the door of the house was opened, and a giant maiden stood within the doorway. Frey gazed and gazed upon her. So great was the beauty of her face that it was like starlight in a dark land. She looked from the doorway of the house and then turned and went within, shutting the door. Frey sat on Odin's high seat for long, and then he went down the steps of the tower, and he passed by the 2 wolves, Gerda and Frey, that looked threateningly upon him. He went out through Asgard, but he found no one to please him in the city of the gods. That night sleep did not come to him, for his thoughts were fixed upon the loveliness of the giant maiden he had looked upon. And when the morning came, he was filled with loneliness because he thought himself so far from her. He went to Aloud-Acton again, thinking to climb the tower and have sight of her once more. But now the 2 wolves, Gerda and Frey, bared their teeth at him and would not let him pass, although he spoke to them again in the language of the gods. He went and spoke to wise Njord, his father. She who you have seen, my son, said Njord, is Gerda, the daughter of the giant Geimir. You must give over thinking of her. Your love for her would be an ill thing for you. Why would it be an ill thing for me? Frey asked. because you would have to give that which you prize most for the sake of coming to her. That which I prize most, said Frey, is my magic sword. You will have to give your magic sword, said his father, the wise Njord. I will give it, said Frey, loosening his magic sword from his belt. Bethink thee, my son, said Njord, if thou givest thy sword, what weapon wilt thou have on the day of Ragnarok, when the giants will make war upon the gods? Frey did not speak, but he thought the day of Ragnarok was far off. I cannot live without Gerda, he said as he turned away. There was one in Asgard who was called Skirnir. He was a venturesome being who never cared what he said or did. To no one else but Skirnir could Frey bring himself to tell of the trouble that had fallen on him, the trouble that was his punishment for his placing himself on the seat of the All-Father. Skirnir laughed when he heard Frey's tale. Thou, a Van, in love with a maid of Jotunheim? Oh, this is fun indeed. Will ye make a marriage of it? Would that I might even speak to her or send a message of love to her, said Frey, but I may not leave my watch over the elves. And if I should take a message to Gerda, said Skirnir, the venturesome, what will my reward be? My boat, Skidbladnir, or my boar, the golden bristle, said Frey. No, said Skirnir. I want something to go by my side. I want something to use in my hand. Give me the magic sword that you own. Frey thought upon what his father had said, that he would be weaponless on the day of Ragnarok, when the giants would make war upon the gods and when Asgard would be endangered. He thought upon this and drew back from Skirnir, and for a while he remained in thought, and all the while the thick-set Skirnir was laughing at him out of his wide mouth and his blue eyes. Then Frey said to himself, the day of Ragnarok is far off, and I cannot live without Gerda. He drew the magic sword from his belt, and he placed it in Skirnir's hand. I give you my sword, Skirnir, he said. Take my message to Gerda, Gymer's daughter. Show her this gold and these precious jewels, and say that I love her and that I claim her love. I shall bring the maid to you, said Skirnir the venturesome. But how wilt thou get to Jotunheim, said Frey, suddenly remembering how dark the giant's land was and how terrible were the approaches to it. Oh, with a good sword and a good horse one can get anywhere, said Skirnir, and my horse is a mighty horse, and you have given me your sword of magic. Tomorrow I shall make the journey. Skirnir rode across Bifrost, the Rainbow Bridge, laughing out of his wide mouth and his blue eyes at Heimdall, the warder of the bridge to Asgard. His mighty horse trod the earth of Midgard and swam the river that divides Midgard, the world of men, from Jotunheim, the realm of the giants. He rode on heedlessly and recklessly, as he did all things, and then out of the iron forests came the monstrous wolves of Jotunheim to tear and devour him and his mighty horse. It was well for Skirnir that he had in his belt Frey's magic sword. Its edge slew and its gleam frightened the monstrous beasts. On and on Skirnir rode on his mighty horse, and then he came to a wall of fire. No other horse but his mighty horse would go through it. Skirnir rode through the fire and came to the dale on which was Gymer's dwelling. And I think, yes, here I have a picture to share with you. You can see the sword and the mighty horse. All right. And now he was before the house that Frey had seen Gerda enter on the day when he had climbed Aloud-Acton, Odin's watchtower. The mighty hounds that guarded Gymer's dwelling came and bayed around him, but the gleam of the magic sword kept them at bay. Skirnir backed his horse to the door, and he made his horse's hooves strike against it. Geimer was in the feast hall drinking with his giant friends, and he did not hear the baying of the hounds nor the clatter that Skirner made on the door. But Gerda sat spinning with her maidens in the hall. "Who comes to Geimer's door?" she said. "A warrior upon a mighty horse," said one of the maidens. "Even though he be an enemy and one who slew my brother, yet we shall open the door to him and give him a cup of Geimer's mead," said Gerda. One of the maidens opened the door, and Skirner entered Geimer's dwelling. He knew Gerda amongst the maidens. He went to her and showed her the rich gold and the precious jewels he had brought from Frey. "These are for you, fairest Gerda," he said, "if you will give your love to Frey, the chief of the Vanir." "Show your gold and jewels to other maidens," said Gerda. "Gold and jewels will never bring me to give my love." Then Skirner the adventuresome, the heedless of his words, drew the magic sword from his belt and held it above her. "Give your love to Frey, who has given me this sword, or meet your death by the edge of it." Gerda, Geimer's daughter, only laughed at the reckless Skirner. "Make the daughters of men fearful by the sharpness of Frey's sword," she said, "but do not try to frighten a giant's daughter with it." Then Skirner the reckless, heedless of his words, made the magic sword flash before her eyes, while he cried out in a terrible voice, saying a spell over her, "Gerda, I will curse thee! Yes, with this magic blade I shall touch thee. Such is its power, that like a thistle withered 'twill leave thee, like a thistle the wind strips from the roof." Hearing these terrible words, and the strange hissings of the magic sword, Gerda threw herself on the ground, crying out for pity. But Skirner stood above her, and the magic sword flashed and hissed. Skirner sang, "More ugly I'll leave thee than maid ever was. Thou wilt be mocked by men and by giants. A gnome only will wed thee, and now on this instant, with this blade I shall curse thee and leave thee bespelled." She lifted herself up on her knees and cried out to Skirner to spare her from the spell of the magic sword. "Only if thou wilt give thy love to Frey," said Skirner. "I will give my love to him," said Gerda. "Now put up thy magic sword and drink a cup of mead and depart from Geimer's dwelling." "I will not drink a cup of mead, nor shall I depart from Geimer's dwelling until you yourself say that you will meet and speak with Frey." "I will meet and speak with him," said Gerda. "When will you meet and speak with him?" asked Skirner. "In the woods of Barry, 9 nights from this. Let him come and meet me there." Then Skirner put up the magic sword and drank the cup of mead that Gerda gave him. He rode from Geimer's house, laughing aloud at having won Gerda for Frey, and so making the magic sword his own forever. Skirner, the venturesome, heedless of words, riding across Bifrost on his mighty horse, found Frey standing, waiting beside... Skirner the venturesome, heedless of his words, riding across Bifrost on his mighty horse, found Frey standing, waiting for him beside Heimdall, the warder of the bridge to Asgard. "What news dost thou bring me?" cried Frey. "Speak, Skirner, before thou dismount from thine horse." "In 9 nights from this, thou mayst meet Gerda in Barry Woods," said Skirner. He looked at him, laughing out of his wide mouth and his blue eyes. But Frey turned away, saying to himself, "Long is day 1, long, long 2. Oh, can I live through 9 long days?" Long indeed were these days for Frey. But the 9th day came, and in the evening Frey went to Barry Wood, and there he met Gerda, the giant maid. She was as fair as when he'd seen her before the door of Geimer's house, and when she saw Frey, so tall and noble-looking, the giant's daughter was glad that Skirner the venturesome had made her promise to come to Barry Wood. They gave each other rings of gold. It was settled that the giant maid should become a bride and come to Asgard. Gerda came, but another giant maid came also, and this is how that came to be. All of the dwellers of Asgard were standing before the great gate, waiting to welcome the bride of Frey. There appeared a giant maid who was not Gerda, all in armor was she. I am Skadi, she said, the daughter of Thiassi. My father met his death at the hands of the dwellers of Asgard. I claim a recompense. What recompense would you have, maiden? Said Odin, smiling to see a giant maid standing so boldly in Asgard. A husband from amongst you, even as Gerda, and I myself must be let to choose him. All laughed aloud at the words of Skadi. Then said Odin, laughing, We will let you choose a husband from amongst us, but you must choose him by his feet. I'll choose him whatever way you will, said Skadi, fixing her eyes on Baldur, the most beautiful of all the dwellers in Asgard. Then they put a bandage around her eyes, and the Aesir and the Vanir sat in a half circle around, and as she went, she stooped over and laid her hands upon their feet, and at last she came to one whose feet were so finely formed she felt sure that it was Baldur. She stood up and said, This is the one that Skadi chooses for her husband. And then the Aesir and the Vanir laughed more and more. And she took the bandage off of her eyes, and she saw not Baldur the beautiful, but Njord, the father of Frey. But as Skadi looked more and more on Njord, she became more and more contented with her choice, for Njord was strong and noble-looking. These two, Njord and Skadi, went first to live in Njord's palace by the sea. But the coming of the sea mew would waken Skadi too early in the morning, and she drew her husband to the mountain top, where she was more at home. He would not live away long from the sound of the sea. Back and forward between the mountains and the sea, Skadi and Njord went. But Gerda stayed in Asgard with Frey, her husband, and the Aesir and the Vanir came to greatly love Gerda, the giant maid. And that is the end of the 7th part of the Children of Odin. Thank you for joining me.